Yeah.
Ralph Waldo Emerson once said that his favorite part of the church service was the silence before the church service.
He evidently never came here because this is the quietest I've ever heard before church. And we always liked the fact that when you left church, you couldn't leave church. When the church service was over, it lasted for another 45 minutes because people would stand in the back and mill around and talk about this and talk about that. So you had to allot that much more time if you had plans for the day. But that's what it's all about. It's all about community, either before or after. So we could work more on silence. We used to have, I think the chime is still up here. We used to do that little thing where we would do a moment of silence and do the chime.
They've been there.
We can find it. If anybody wants to see that again.
Yeah, that was me.
You like that? Okay, we can put that back in. All I have to do is find the chime and we'll schedule it in. And there's nothing like when the service is running short, a little bit of silence to fill that time up. So that's what we'll do. And any other suggestions anybody has, feel free. We did a religious one. I copied one of my wife's sermons, so I haven't heard anybody say yay or nay, whether they liked it or didn't like it. You liked it, so I plan on, she's got like 25 years of sermons, and I'll pick the ones that have a little bit of humor and a little bit of, I mean, some of them are too religious even for me, but I like a little bit of Christianity, a little bit of religion. That's my culture, that's my history. So we're not going to overindulge, but we're going to definitely go with it. So. That was interesting. I turned on notes and see it appearing on the screen. I don't know how to turn that off. That is weird. Okay. Welcome to First Universalist Church of New Madison. Nice to have you here or online on this really, truly muggy day, the first really muggy day of summer. Fans are all on. I don't think they're going to be too overpowering noise-wise. I have a whole collection of paper towels, so we'll be wiping as we go along. Really happy to have Pastor Eric with us here today from El Dorado, and he'll be speaking on angels. I don't know exactly the topic, so you can see our background slides are all going to be angels. I don't know if I was in kind of a dark mood this week or whatever, but they're not the happiest of angels, so we'll explain as we go along. As you know, angels have a real important part in our culture from generations and generations back. All right, welcome and announcements. Our welcome is 482 in your hymnal. Pretty much everything's going to be out of the hymnal this week, so you're going to be flipping through the pages, but I haven't pre-marked anything, so you'll have plenty of time. If it is language that makes us human, one half of language is to listen. Silence can exist without speech, but speech cannot live without silence. Listen to the speech of others. Listen even more to their silence. To pray is to listen to the revelations of nature, to the meaning of events. To listen to music is to listen also to silence, and to find the stillness deepened and enriched. By Jacob Trapp. And we were just talking about silence, so how apropos. Do you have any announcements?
Just real quickly, big news. We had our church boiler inspection on Friday.
Oh, all right.
And that was good. It passed with flying colors. Thanks to Chaz and other people taking great care of it. Also, I would note that is part of our current church insurance policy, so they pay for the inspection, and more importantly, they pay for our state boiler permit, send it to the state, and we get it back to the state. So we have to thank the Mennonite insurance folks for that.
The Mennonites are a blessing. They have all kinds of insurance, particularly for religious orders, and they are, you can say, they are a fair group. You can't take advantage of them because they're Mennonites, but they are fair. And I'll explain that later if anybody wants a little bit of enlightenment on that. that.
The only other brief announcement, and it's actually much more important than boilers, but it's great to see Ashley. Thank
Yes.
you. And we had a great chat before the service.
Excellent,
So,
yes.
welcome.
I thought maybe you'd moved. What was the other thing we're going to do? Oh, next week Nancy will be here, and then we're back wherever we go from there. And then July 4th, we're meeting with El Dorado. We wanted to clarify that. Is it going to be like bring your own meal, or is it going to be like a carry-in where everything is shared?
Bring your own main thing that you want to have for your picnic. If you feel like sharing, but you're not obligated, you could always bring an item to share, but
Okay.
no one is required.
So-
Somebody had asked me, is it wrong if I bring something to share? Like, no, but you're not obligated to.
Okay. So it's a half of a carry-in. Bring your own everything for yourself, but bring something that you're welcome to share. And I'm sure as you go down the line, if they hit your hand with a wooden spoon, then keep your hand out of their cookies.
And more details coming. But
Yep.
on Sunday, July 4th, we will not have a service here. We'll meet at the El Dorado Park, right at the north edge of town. More details to follow.
Yes.
Yeah, and I'll get a list of things to think, you may want to bring this or that.
Okay.
And yeah.
The clarification is no church here July 4th, which is a Sunday. And we're not going to the church in El Dorado. We're going to the park.
We will worship outdoors.
Yes, and it's like this, it'll be interesting. They do have a shelter though, don't they?
The picnic shelter, and it itself is within a grove of trees.
Okay.
So,
And the park is at the
north end.
north edge of town.
Old Smeller Road and 726.
It's on 726, so if you just drive through El Dorado on 726, you won't miss it.
Before you get in the elevator.
Because there's only one park in town.
Correct.
10 o'clock, 10 o'clock.
10:30.
10:30.
10:30.
Thank you, Chaz.
If you show up early, that won't be a problem because I'll probably be there. All right. The prelude is going to be love as a many splendored thing. Speaking of angels. Anybody know who this is? Just offhand. The most famous angel. Archangel Michael. Lots of stories about that, but we're not going into all that now, but we might later. But you notice what Archangel Michael has in his hand there. A lot of stories about angels, a lot of interesting facts, which I was just starting to get into and didn't get enough to actually make something out of. So we may do that later. This angel is just an angel you would see anywhere. It's kind of everybody's idea of what an angel is. Sometimes there can be misconceptions there too. The chalice lighting is 447. At times our own light goes out and is rekindled by a spark from another person. Each of us has cause to think with deep gratitude of those who have lighted the flame within us. Let's hope today lights the flame within you, whether you're here or somewhere else. Our opening hymn is number 10 in your hymnal. Overseeing all eternal love remains. All right, our affirmation is 464. And then all that has divided us will merge, and then compassion will be wedded to power. And then softness will come to a world that is harsh and unkind.
And then both men and women will be gentle.
And then both men and women and men will be strong.
And then no person will be subject to another's will.
And then all will be rich and free and varied.
And then the greed of some will give way to the needs of many.
And then all will share equally in the earth's abundance.
And then all will care for the sick and the weak and the old.
And then all will nourish the young.
And then all will cherish life's creatures.
And then all will live in harmony with each other and the earth.
And then everywhere will be called Eden once again.
By Judy Chicago. And then everywhere will be called Eden once again. All right, as I mentioned, I was going on a little kind of an interesting path with angels. You all know the 7 fallen angels if you had any Christian history or did any Old Testament. Moloch, Chemosh, Dagon, Belial, Beelzebub, and Satan. And my pronunciations are probably way off, but we'll work on that later. I can tell you a little story. When I was in like 12 or 13 years old, actually from the time I was like 10, whatever, I was in 4-H club because my parents had a farm. We always had Angus cattle, and if you know anything about Angus cattle, they are not the tamest cattle in the world. So I had one that I was trying to break the lead, who weighed 3 times more than I did, and he was dragging me around the lot. And my dad said, "We're going to name that calf Beelzebub." And I had no idea where Beelzebub came from, but that's what, when you grow up in a Methodist church in Michigan and you go to church every Sunday, you get education. So he knew, my dad, who was not a religious person, knew all the names of all the fallen angels And this calf definitely was a Beelzebub. All right, and of course Satan is the leader of the fallen angels. Okay, so you're getting a little history as we go along here. And to keep this going, children's story. Does anybody know who this is? Joseph Mengele.
Oh.
The Weisse Engel. He was the German Nazi doctor of Auschwitz who used to do unspeakable things to the Jewish and the other alternative prisoners that they had at Auschwitz. The most incredible one that I saw was he used to inject adrenaline into the eyeballs of children to see if he could change the color of the iris. If they had blue eyes, he wanted to see if he could make it brown. These are the kind of experiments that people did, and this is what happens. We don't want to go too dark here, but this is what happens with the word angel, or the idea of angel can be taken in any direction. All right, our children's story, much better. Everybody know who Richard Scarry is? He does his own writing and his own pictures, and you'll have to come up and look at these afterwards. I'm only going to do a little bit short. And the reason I'm doing Richard Scarry, this was written in 1960, and it is like pulling the pages out of history. It's pretty incredible. What do people do all day? And they've got pictures of the hotel, the post office, watch repairs, a detective agency, the police with a little motorcycle. And on this side they have the dentist, the doctor, the eye doctor, a dressmaker. Do we have any dressmakers anybody knows of? Some people still do alterations, but not many. The beauty parlor still have those, real estate, the prescriptions at the pharmacist, dancing school. They have the street cleaner. Remember the pictures of the street cleaner carrying a little thing on two wheels that had his brooms and his shovels, and he'd walk down the street sweeping up the stuff on the side and putting it in a little tub. They have the guys working underground with the sewage pipes and the electric lines and the telephone booth. When's the last time you ever saw a telephone booth? Some workers always do their work at the same place. Some workers work indoors and some work outdoors. Some work up in the sky and some work underground. Others travel from place to place to do their jobs. What does your daddy do? What does your mommy do? And what do you do? Are you a good helper? They have a delivery boy, a laundress, the firehouse with the sleeping fireman, a hardware store, the window washer hard at work, the barber shop, and the automobile salesman and the taxi. Really a fun book with all kinds of really neat instructions and illustrations, so I'll be kind of going on with that as we go. Okay, sharing of joys and concerns. Yes?
I am so grateful to have had a visit from our daughter Maureen from Portland, Maine. She and her partner Tim were able to travel to Ohio and stay with us most of the week. We had no much of any place at all. That was
Excellent.
It's all we wanted, just getting together, and it was very, very nice.
And people are starting to travel and move, and nobody today has masks. I'm assuming we're all vaccinated, and I still wear a mask when I'm out in public. The numbers are going down, but you have to be careful because the variants are out there. So we still have the hand sanitizer here. We have masks available, so feel free to come. Feel free to wear a mask if you feel that you need the protection. There's a lot of people that aren't wearing masks that should be, so when I'm out in public, I still wear mine. I wore mine last night. We went to Hoosier Park, Harrah's Hoosier Park, and Curly won his race last night. And we had to wait for 15 minutes until the tornado warning passed, and the black clouds and the rain pelted down. So it turns out Curly is a mudder. He wins even in a muddy track. So good for Curly. All right. Do we have any joys and concerns? We have problems in the world as always. The Palestinian thing is still going on. It's kind of dropped out of the news, but we will be getting something, a presentation in the next few weeks about Palestine. We decided to wait a couple weeks because Ty is visiting his family, and he was really interested in being part of that, so that will be coming up.
I would mention a milestone this past week, maybe more toward Friday, I believe it's Saturday, not a particularly good milestone, but talking about the pandemic, 600,000 deaths. We reached that 600,000, I believe, Friday or Saturday. perhaps somewhere in there. A great lesson for all of us, not just in terms of modern miracles, in terms of vaccines and technology and real science versus faux science, but also a lesson in the politicization of a pandemic and a virus, as we've not just seen in Ohio, but all over the country.
Yes.
And I'm not going to use politics anymore in this discussion, but House Bill 248, pending in the Ohio legislature, basically an anti-vaccine bill to be pushed through the legislature. I provided my first written testimony yesterday, due by 5 o'clock in the evening, but certainly I said I wasn't going to politic anymore through joys and concerns, but that certainly goes along and reflects how much further we need to go with 600,000 deaths and having legislation like that pending before the Ohio legislature.
And I'll politic a little more. The test is coming up in states like Louisiana, Alabama. The vaccination rate is 40% or less. Florida has passed a rule that you can't ask anybody if they've been vaccinated. So that now the question is, what's going to happen with all these tour boats, the Caribbean, the boats that come through? They just announced that 2 people on one of the cruise ships have been tested positive for the virus. And you know what happens in an enclosed cruise ship, how fast that would settle. So the idea was everybody was supposed to be vaccinated. So we'll have to see how all this shakes out. But this is where reality.
House Bill 248.
Yeah, exactly.
In Ohio right now.
Yep.
Anti-vaccine.
This is where reality, or the rubber meets the road, so to speak. This is where reality is going to tell us whether this works or doesn't work. All right, kind of off on a tangent, and we'll light one more candle for all those joys, concerns, thoughts, prayers, fears that you don't feel free to voice out loud. Share them with us if you need to. We are here. Okay, our message, and this is a little more of the traditional angel picture of classic era. An Angel Speaks by Pastor Derek.
My thanks to the Universalist Church in El Dorado for releasing me to serve here this morning. I'm always grateful for the relationship that exists between our 2 churches. And just as an aside, the complete title is An Angel Speaks, parentheses, in poetry. So I have to admit I'm not much for angels. I tend to lean closer to the opinion of your late former minister, the Reverend Wells Behe, who once told me that angels are fairies for grown-ups. His tone was a bit dismissive, more than I would take on, but that was just kind of his personality if you ever knew him. A bit superior, and with an implication that angels are childish things to hold on to. And I find it wonderful, the diversity of images that Tim found this morning to put up on the screen, because there is a whole world of sort of angel imagery and artwork. But for most of my life, most of what I've encountered have been sort of mass-marketed paintings and porcelain statues. And they always have like very flowing robes and very flowing hair and youthful faces and big white wings. And I just deep inside me associate that with elderly Catholic aunts who have little porcelain statues all over the place that are basically the more pious-looking equivalent of a precious moment figurine. And at another layer below that, it just, like, at my gut, I associate it with low-cost potpourri. And scented candles with fakey smelling aromas of roses and vanilla cookies. It all just feels a little too precious, a little too cute, and a little too cloying. And I could just as easily go without it. And then, during the middle of the pandemic, a friend of mine who has a side gig doing book reviews mailed me this very bland-looking book. An Angel Speaks, selected poems by Homero Aregis. Well, great, I sarcastically thought, just what I need, the printed equivalent of porcelain kitsch. But, to be polite, I tried to read a bit of it, to honor the person who gave it to me, but also to give the book a chance. Because I do enjoy poetry, even though I rarely have bought a full-length book of poems. Now, like many things in life, it wasn't until I opened the bland-looking book that I even got a basic understanding of what it was that had been sent my way. Homero Aregis, born in Mexico in 1940 and still alive and writing, is probably one of the better-known poets of the Spanish-speaking world, as well as Mexico's former ambassador to the Netherlands, and then later in life to Switzerland. His poems touch quite often on mystical themes and environmental themes, and he has a long history of organizing artists to convey environmental ideas to the general public. His poems also routinely include angels. And despite being a two-time winner of a Guggenheim Award, and despite his hands-on work with a carefully chosen translator of Spanish to English, his work really is just not well known in the English-speaking world. But I also observed that poetry in our culture is not as well loved as it once was. For example, my grandmother had a it was a favorite book of poetry that she kept next to her armchair or sometimes her bed from her late teen years until she died at the age of 97. It was probably about like half this size, same width, bound in black leather. I cannot remember what it was. It was a little collection of poems. And she loved it so dearly, it was with her her entire life, probably from about 16 to the age of 97. This morning's first hymn, Immortal Love, began its existence as a poem by John Greenleaf Whittier. It was only later that this poem and about 100 other poems by Whittier were set to music as popular church hymns. And by the way, Whittier became amazingly wealthy off his work as a poet. Greeting cards, poems that were turned into hymns, books of poems. Hard to imagine a poetry industry, and such a thing existed. There is even, so famous was he, that there is an entire city in California that bears his name. The city of Whittier, California, outside Los Angeles. The industry and wealth of poets, which is just kind of mind-blowing. And as another little by the way, our closing hymn, it came upon the midnight clear. The most famous Christmas carol ever composed by a Unitarian began its existence as a poem written in response to the 19th century war between the United States and Mexico. Edmund Hamilton Sears was trying to simultaneously convey to his readers his melancholy feelings about the war, his yearnings for peace, and his hopes that people would choose another way forward that would be in better keeping with the teachings of the Prince of Peace. Well, moving on from our hymns, I think my generation might be the last generation that went to school with the requirement that we memorize poems for recital in front of the class. An exercise that at the time, I'm going to admit, I deeply, deeply resented. Oh, God, I hated it. It felt like busy work, and busy work that was also intended to set you up for humiliation in front of all the other kids. But looking back, I realized that it was a tool for learning mental discipline, not just memorizing, but also concentrating. Building some blocks for future public speaking, as well as giving me some kind of exposure to culture and the creative arts. Things, well, as a kid with a scientific bent, I was likely to ignore if left to my own devices. And that kind of creative poverty can create a lack of creativity later in life, when kids are not exposed to the creative arts. Poetry is, deep down, a specialized form of human language, and just about every culture on the planet that has been or is now produces poetry. There's a whole bunch of diversity in terms of length of poems, rules about rhyming and meter, settings in which the poems would be spoken, and even in some cultures, rules around whether the poem could be written down or memorized. For example, I did not realize until lately that in the Hindu religion, many of the sacred poems were, well into the 1800s, memorized by the priests and handed down in oral tradition over and over and over again, on the grounds that printing it changes the way people encounter it. And they weren't quite so worried about getting it right, although, that was an emphasis on memorizing it correctly. But they wanted people to have the meter and the performance and the projection. And those things could not be captured on the written page. So poetry is a very deep and wide human experience, an activity that every culture engages in. And I've wondered if it is because poetry can communicate and touch us in ways that prose writing finds more difficult. Ways that use images and words, symbols, to provoke emotions and memories along paths that are something bigger and wider than literal. Between every poet and every reader of poetry, there is a unique interaction about what the composition means. Because every reader brings to the poem a unique set of life experiences. And the poet can't completely predict them. So with that in mind, I'm going to read for you the official English version of Homero Aregius' poem, "The Angel is a Blue Silence." An angel is a blue silence we make out with our eyes. An angel is a solitary tree in a place where a forest once stood. The angel is a bird late in leaving when the birds have already flown. An angel is the peal of a bell on a plain where there are no bells. An angel is a ray of sunshine through the middle of the night. I found myself this week thinking about how there is so much about theology and spirituality that is best approached poetically, not in a spirit of literalism where words can trend towards lists and chronologies and formulas and mechanical processes, but in a spirit of word symbols, inner associations, emotions, memories, and the unique experiences that exist between the writers of sacred words and the person who reads sacred words. To reference the Catholic bishop and TV preacher Fulton Sheen, why couldn't a single word of Scripture say a million wondrous things to a million different people? And that would be more powerful than each word, only meaning one and only one thing. And should it be such a surprise? So much of different scriptures are in poetry. Biblical psalms. I've been told by observant Muslims that the entire Quran is considered a work of poetry. The sacred songs and chants that can be found all over the world. Rolling today's poem around in my mind and looking deeper into the issue of angels, it shouldn't have surprised me that our winged, precious moment figurines are not how angels have always been presented. Tim actually got us a nice diversity of them. Now, with the exception of biblical seraphim with their incomprehensible arrangement of 6 wings, I still can't wrap my head around what that's supposed to look like. Biblical angels were not frequently described as having wings at all. Most often they were depicted simply as people, most often associated with the phrase, "fear not," spoken as they showed up in both the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament. In these stories, fear not. They were surprising. They were anxiety-provoking. They were perhaps perplexing. And they were messengers in these stories. Messengers. Whether the story is history or sacred fable. Or maybe there were even times when they were the message itself. Messengers and messages as surprising as a silence Homero Aregis described as blue. Messengers and messages described by the poet as being carried by a lone tree in a place where once an entire forest had stood. Messengers and messages as perplexing and maybe even frightening as the sound of a bell sounding out on a grassland where there are no bell towers and there are no bells. As hopeful and paradoxical as a ray of sunshine illuminating our way in the middle of the night. I don't believe in angels in any conventional sense. And yet they are speaking to me. And should that be so strange that on the spiritual journey, any of us might encounter unexpected messengers, messages that come to us from the sky, from the trees, from the birds, from the sounds carried on the wind, on the primal interactions of day and night, or from unexpected people who come upon us and say, "Fear not." So give yourself permission to engage your spirituality poetically. Angels or not, there's a wisdom that can speak its message, like a blue silence that we make out with our eyes. And those are my words. And this congregation probably has its own as well. So Tim, would you, or somebody else facilitate?
I'd like to know what you have to say about the relationship of the Book of Psalms to poetry. Didn't I once learn that in Sunday school about Psalms and poetry?
Yeah, Psalms are all poems. Each one its own poem. And they were, by most archaeological and sort of students of biblical Hebrew, probably the initial Jewish hymnal. And what I find fascinating is, as poems, they've endured a very long time. And they've crossed a bunch of sort of cultural and religious barriers. There was a time when churches in the Puritan tradition would not sing any hymns that were not psalms that had been set to music, because anything else would just be way too not pious. If I go to my husband's Episcopal church, the psalms could be chanted, plain song chant. They could be sung, set to a hymn tune, or they could be recited. And they could be recited responsively, like every other line. There could be a sung antiphon, where parts of it get sung or said, and then there's a verse that gets repeated in song. I don't know, it just fascinates me how this thing... And when I've gone on retreat, oddly enough, in an Episcopalian monastery in Michigan, there is such a thing. It's very close to the town of Three Rivers. The monks there have a practice of going through the Psalms one by one, by one, by one, by one, by one, until they finish the whole book of Psalms, and they start over again. They cycle through. They do a couple at each of their worship services, and they worship 7 times a day, I want to say. The early ones, like at 4 a.m., and I never get up for that. But you can hear the bell and see them filing into the chapel at 4 a.m. I think it's called lauds. Lauds. I think that the time of prayer is called, they have names for each of, I think it's lauds. L-A-U-D-S. There's lauds, there's matins. When you get to the evenings, there's vespers and compline. So, but yeah, I'm that about Psalms. Yeah, and I've been told by a number of observant Muslims that the Quran is considered by them to be one entire work of poetry, but that when you read it in translation out of the Arabic, the poetic arrangement of it in terms of meter is completely lost, which is why most Muslims prefer that the Quran be read and studied in Arabic when possible, because they feel that something ends up missing, no matter how careful the translator is. Roberta. Sorry, part of my mind is still in Mexico with the poet.
That sounded pretty. This is probably somewhat off topic, but Gary mentioned about the little children they had to learn poetry and all that. Are any contest. And I went to the thing, you remember such a thing. It was awful. You had before? You had to speak this, well, it wasn't long. It was a long dissertation thing. You got to choose which one you want to speak. And there were all these kids. Well, Bill Brewer always won the Prince of Peace contest. He was valedictorian, won the Prince of Peace and all this, and of course all that was gone. So, anyway.
I was interested in agency, how we have this history of creating something to take the blame or the responsibility off of people. In other words, angels, when a lot of times when something good happens to somebody, they say an angel appeared and did this good thing for me. And it was a person, but it can't be a person. It has to have been an angel that stopped when I was broken down on the road, or interceded when I was being attacked and came to my aid, or whatever it was. They're always called angels. And on the contrast, when bad things happen, it's not a person did it, it's the devil did it, or Satan did it, or there was demons, or whatever you want to call them. Kind of like the leprechaun and the thing we were talking about before.
Yeah, that is a fascinating use of that imagery. It's not completely restricted to our own culture. I mean, other cultures have concepts of when events happen, ascribing them to an evil spirit or a good spirit. All those things are somewhat foreign to my experience of the world. And yet I can appreciate when an unexpected act of compassion or mercy happens, assigning a sacredness to that moment and to that act that a person is doing. I remember one time, this was way back when I was doing my chaplaincy internship down in Evansville. My car just suddenly died on the Lloyd Expressway. And it died in a way where I had to pull off into the center median. So there I am in the center median traffic, and my cell phone died. So there I am trapped on the traffic island with cars speeding around in the middle of the highway, and I can't figure out how to get out of there without throwing my body into traffic, and my phone won't work. And there was this nice guy in a pickup truck who pulled up behind me and said, "You got a problem?" I was like, "Yeah, my car died and my cell phone won't work." He was like, "Oh, dude, I'll call you a tow." He didn't have to stop. He could have kept driving like everyone else. That was an act of compassion and mercy that somebody took, and I will name that moment as sacred. But I don't have to blame it on anything beyond who I saw right there. If that is, in some sense, God at work in him, I'll take that too. But I'll start off by saying that he engaged in an act of mercy. He had to make some kind of decision to stop and help me.
And I guess the commentary I keep looking at is, I don't know whether to say it's sad or whatever, it's like a Good Samaritan. Why is that a miracle? Why is that unexpected? Shouldn't we be able to expect people to be kind and help us on a regular basis? Why does it always say it's a real surprise when somebody stops and helps me?
Yeah, but humans are humans. How many times have I driven by somebody on the side of the road and I didn't stop because, one, I was in a rush, B, I just didn't feel that I had the time or wherewithal, or C, I looked at the car and thought, do I want to interact with that person? As a gay guy with a little rainbow thing on the back of my car, I would hesitate to stop for something that had a big Trump flag flying around behind it. I hope the person would be nice to me if I stopped to help, but you never know. And sometimes we're just selfish. And we know better. And other times, frightening, because I know my mother would never stop by the side of the road to help somebody, because her thought is, I'm a woman, I'm alone, I'm over 70. Like,
That's okay.
and that's okay, Mom. Just keep driving. If you need to, you can call the police, though, and let them know that someone's stuck on the side of the road. Well, I know we're running short. We still need time for the offertory.
Yes,
And the
don't
final.
worry about running short.
I will read, just real quickly, one more poem by Regis. It's short. Winds of Stone. When the wind fled over the plains, man came and turned it into stone. And when the sun tumbled down its rays, man came and turned it into stone. And when the snake slithered across time, man came and turned it into stone. Ensnared death with his eyes, cupped the invisible with his hands, froze impermanence into a shape, and into each shape thrust a god. But the wind trapped in a stone sank into the dust and the grass. The midday sun slipped into night, and the snake flew away. Death escaped from its statue and walked around roads and villages. And since then has a human face, man goes to himself, destroyed by his own gods. And all that will remain was there at the beginning, a few stones. One of his more environmental pieces. Thank you.
Thank you. And we may have to start having a poem every week. And as a final note, if you remember last week's sermon, if you either watched it or were here, the point of the sermon, I'll bring it down to you, focus not on yourself, but on others. That was one of my wife's sermons, and I'll be bringing more of those to you. But she has a real knack for bringing those points up. Okay. Offering. A Greater Good for Ourselves and Our World by Kayla Parker. We know that our financial contributions to this congregation come from sacrifice and hard work. We are so grateful for this and commit together to ensure that the funds we gather collectively do a greater good for ourselves and our world than they could have done alone. May there be an offering to sustain and grow the life and mission of this congregation. May we give in love and in hope. You're invited to put something in the plate. If you need something, take it out. Don't feel obligated to put something in. And if you're watching from somewhere else, there's a website is up there, or you can just slip an envelope under the door and be anonymous. Or you can put your name on it, and we'll thank you. by When You Wish Upon a Star. How many of you are old enough to remember when color TVs first came out? Mom and Dad would set you down on a Sunday night and give you a big bowl of popcorn and the one soda you were allowed every week to watch Disney World, or to watch the Disney show, which was pretty incredible. Okay, our last hymn is 244. It Came Upon the Midnight Clear. Christmas in June. What a feeling as the sweat's rolling off. This is a timeless song.
Yeah, the words are good.
Yeah, and people don't always hear the words. And a lot of times at Christmas time, you're kind of in the Christmas spirit and you're not really listening to the words. You hear peace, and we talk about peace all the time. But peace is something that we really need to talk about, and we really need to focus on peace, which doesn't seem to be happening, which is how come I end up on the dark side all the time. So, does anybody recognize this picture?
Who is that?
That is Ben Affleck.
Mm-hmm.
Does anybody remember the movie Dogma from 1999?
Brilliant movie.
A brilliant movie. I recommend it highly. I've considered, once we start going back together, we had a thing last year or 2 years ago where we would get together and have a meal. Anybody who wanted to was welcome to come. I'm thinking about trying to start that again and have a movie and a meal maybe even have it at the church, do the movie up here rather than go to somebody's house or go to somebody's house if they would want to do that. But anyway, if people are interested in looking at a movie like Dogma and then talking about it afterwards, this movie had Ben Affleck, Selma Hayek, Alan Rickman, Matt Damon, George Carlin. If you know who Kevin Smith is, he's the one that directed it. He's a crazy person from the word go. These were Ben Affleck and Matt Damon were avenging angels. There's a whole involved story that goes in with it, but it's pretty incredible and it was a lot of fun. So, and it was also kind of instructive. So if you're interested in that, it's called Dogma. And if anybody is interested in viewing it as a group, let me know and we'll set up a time sometime here in the future. Either at maybe we'll go to my cottage at the lake and watch it there. Okay, closing words are 685, part 1.
Are you doing them or are we doing them?
I don't know, I haven't looked at it yet. This is scary.
Oops.
We could say it in unison.
We can say anything in unison here. There's never a problem with that.
685, part 1.
By T.S. Eliot. Well, that tells you how much fun it's going to be. Are you ready?
Yes.
What
We call a beginning is often the end, and to make an end is to make a beginning. The end is where we start from.
I think we need to have a poem every week, so we'll do that. All right, postlude, sent forth by God's blessing, ain't it the truth? Our final slide is the typical angel. I cannot explain why she or he seems to have a tail. That's a new one. Oh. So, that closes our service from New Madison United Church, UU Church. Have a good week. There's coffee back there. There's hot water back there. Who wants hot water? There's cookies back there. And next week, if it's hot like this, I'm bringing lemonade and a big bucket of ice. So have a good week. If you need something, don't hesitate to call us.